This just came in from J Reds. Says, not sure if you heard, Craig, but Colin Moriarty had an interview with someone that worked on Concord. Turns out the development cost was about $400 million for a game that lasted 2 weeks.
I have not seen it, but I would need some kind of proof to believe that big of a number.
$400 million. Holy shit.
I would need something besides a he said, she said with that type of number. That's insanity.
Now, he has a clip over on X, which is really popping off. Do you have any interest in watching this right now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. Let's check this out. $400 million. Holy shit. Okay, this is Colin Moriarty on the Sacred Symbols podcast. Great group of guys talking games at all times, specifically PlayStation games.
I cannot hear it.
Oh, you can't? Okay, bummer. Nope. Let's try this again. Let's try this one more time. Okay. I could hear it. I don't know about you. Okay. All right. Here is Sacred Symbols, the PlayStation podcast, and Colin Moriarty and his crew.
I want to talk about Concord. I wasn't going to ever talk about this game again because who really gives a shit? However, and I don't do journalism really anymore, as you guys know, and we talk about this a lot. I was a journalist at one time, and I used to break a lot of stories, and these days I don't really grind like that. So the stories that I break these days are usually people, always, not usually, always people coming to me. And someone who worked on Concord reached out to me, and I verified who this person was and went through all of that and talked to this person extensively, for a long time. Ooh. And got some, I think, interesting information that I can share about Concord. I think people will be interested about it. The reason that I wanted to talk about it is because some of the assumptions that I had made about the game were dead wrong as far as how much it cost and how much Sony really lost on it. So the big thing that you really need to know here about this is that Concord cost about $400 million to make.
Oh my God.
And the story goes that
I'm curious to see if that is including the acquisition of the company.
It's got to. There's no way that was just like development costs and marketing. There's no shot.
Wow, $400 million. Yeah.
That's so much. Now, my question would be is, I know he doesn't specify, but who he talked to. He just says he spoke extensively with someone. So it's definitely a bit harder to believe, but if you consider how much they bought Firewalk for, which we, again, still do not know, let's say that was $200 million, and then the full development was $200 million, and that's the $400 million, then that's much more believable. But my God, that's absolutely insane.
To put this in perspective, I just pulled up a list of most expensive films to produce. If $400 million is what it costs to produce Concord, there's only 3 films in the history of movies that have been produced that were made for over $400 million. Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom, and Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Those are the only 4 movies in history. So Concord would be in very rare air if this is true.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at other acquisitions that have happened over the years, and these are different years, but like Take-Two got Gearbox for $460 million, Embracer Group got Aspire for $450 million, Pearl Abyss got CCP Games for $425 million, like Electronic Arts got Playfish for $400, Tencent got Riot for $400. So, I mean, that is in the top percentage when it comes to video game company acquisitions, and never mind the development costs of the game itself.
Let's see what else he has to say here.
Concord, by the time Concord was, so in the first quarter of 2023, Concord had basically entered an alpha state. This was before Sony had even purchased the team. But Sony had been working with Probably Monsters, which was the original owner of Firewalk and Firewalk, probably since late 2020, maybe 2021 at the latest on Concord. The game was in development before that. Up to the point that the game went into alpha state, they had already spent about $200 million on it.
Jesus.
And it's unclear how much of that money is from Probably Monsters and the original investors into the game and how much of that money was from Sony. there's this term in product development, not only with games, but really with everything. You can like manufacture a tchotchke. You guys might have heard of it. It's called minimum viability, or a minimum viable product.
Mhm.
That's often in business is called an MVP. An MVP, a minimal viable products, the baseline for what you can produce. Yes.
Idea behind this, or MVP. The idea behind this is that this is like what you're trying to achieve, and it's like once you cross this barrier, you feel comfortable selling it. It's not that it's the best it can be, or that it's what it's going to be by the time you launch it, because there's all sorts of extra stuff you do to it. But like, this is the minimum viability of the product. When the game had already had $200 million spent on it and was basically in an alpha form in quarter one of 2023, from that point until the game launched, Sony spent another $200 million on it. The scuttlebutt behind the scenes about Concord.
So he's saying that does not include the purchase of the studio, because he's saying that's just $400 million on the development.
Yeah, and that does not include marketing.
That makes no sense. That's such a massive amount of money for the product that we got. It was terrible. There was nothing unique about it. It's not like they came up with these crazy map designs and there were 40 maps or something, or there were 40 heroes. That isn't the case. It was extremely standard for a hero shooter launch.
Man, if this is accurate, this is shocking, to say the least. And like, what do you spend that money on over the course of 18 months? You know, if you're talking early 2023 to mid to late 2024.
Well, the thing is that Sony had made a deal with what are they called? Play Monsters, with the studio that owned them in 2021 for publishing. So Sony was intertwined with them going back to 2021. And before that, the game had already been in development for years. So, I mean, who knows when Sony started giving them money? If it was just at the acquisition, that would make no sense if they just gave them $400 million, 18 months before. But I mean, it's got to go back to 2021 and maybe even before that Sony was, giving them money. I mean, this just sounds insane.
I mean, there's still a lot to go in this video, but and based off of the conversation, but the most shocking thing about this is the idea is, let's just say it did cost $400 million.
Yeah.
Then why are you only giving the game 2 weeks to succeed?
Right. You need to give a larger time frame at that point.
Man, the chat is, you guys are throwing out the money laundering.
I mean, that's what it looks like.
Geez Louise. Let's see what else.
Is that the game was in a laughable shape when it was shown, and ready, basically like when the alpha was ready to go and they were kind of being like, we're ready to kind of get moving towards getting this thing out in the next year or two. It was in such horrible shape that Sony felt like they needed to spend that much money again. So, 200 plus 200 to get the game to the MVP status, not to the status of it being like a great game.
Then why buy the company?
Yeah.
Like if it's in a laughable state,
right,
that you need to invest another $200 million into it, why buy the company?
Yeah, it's not like you're buying a Bethesda here. You're buying a studio that this is their first game.
Wow. What a mess.
Get it to just viability. And that at that time in quarter one, 2023, there was nothing done. Like a major expense was having to urgently outsource much of the game to other studios to finish building the game out. And that two fundamental things were not worked on at all up to the point in which the game was shown in alpha. Onboarding, nothing about that. No, like there was nothing about how players get on, like how they make their character, all that kind of stuff, or, choose their character and get there. And monetization. Two very expensive, very specific and boutique things that happen to games like this. And so that's the first thing that I wanted to say, is that it's not only about the ongoing cost, which would be in the millions to keep the game going per month, but that the game cost about $400 million to make, soup to nuts. Sony put most of that money in, and it is not only so, because we had kind of said like this must be Sony's biggest loss ever on a game, and it is, It's the biggest game Sony's ever released from a budgetary standpoint from the first party or second party. So let that sink in.
It's crazy.
And it's totally unintuitive. There are games that are in development right now at Sony first and second party that are more expensive than this. But as of the games that have come out so far, so think about like Spider-Man 2 and so on and so forth. We know The Last of Us Part 2 cost $220 million. Spider-Man 3 is going to cost about $350 million. This game cost more than that. And they lost all of it because they made no money. They made about $1 million gross revenue, and then they gave it all back. So this is a huge, multiple hundreds of millions of dollar loss. Now the question is, why? Why did this happen?
All right, and this is why. Okay, hopefully it gets into why do they only give it 2 weeks,
Right.
along the way. Right. This is there will be documentaries done about Concord.
Oh, 100%. Sony must have just seen a studio that was making a game that they thought was going to be big, that was in need of cash. So they said, we're going to give you a lot of money. And don't worry, guys, we're going to put a lot of money into the game. But I mean, if these numbers are true, that's absolutely insane. I mean, look at something like ZeniMax, right? They probably sold because they, were running out of money, but they had franchises. Concord was not a franchise. This was Firewalk's first game. So it's not like they were bringing like name brand recognition to the table. I can understand Sony buying them and putting a lot of money into a company in a situation like that. But with Firewalk, it's just so bizarre. It's like it's their first and now clearly their last game. It's not like they had deserved that money. I guess Sony was just really thinking Concord was going to fly off the shelves and it was going to be the next major esports game. But I mean, the esports scene is not in a healthy state. So why, again, they would think that is beyond me. It just shows the massive disconnect with these executives and players.
Golly, like you give me when I hear 400 million, like that amount of money isn't even comprehensible, right? The idea of $400 million being invested into something like this. And for me, my mindset is I would much rather take, let's say we're going to spend $400 million on it. Well, the initial thing was $200 million. Why spend that $200 million to begin with, right? Why not take that $200 million that you were going to spend, make 20 games with a $10 million budget, right? That of all varieties, all shapes and sizes, you can have your representation game, you can have your shoot 'em up game, you can have all sorts of games. $10 million in game development will take you very, very, very far. In this case, it took you nowhere, but it's such a crazy way to think.
I think it just boils down to them seeing, a DEI shooter in the making and them thinking, wow, this is what audiences want. This is what gamers want. And well, clearly nobody wanted it. It's hilarious to see games fail on such a massive scale like this, because we always say, oh, if you're going to make a modern audience game, where's the modern audience? They could show up and they could buy it. There could have been 100,000 people playing Concord, and this DEI shooter could have done really, really well, but it didn't. So why do you continue to make this mistake? I mean, games are very expensive, and they need to be more careful with what they're spending their cash on. They're so worried about pushing the message. They're not worried about what is going to please audiences and what people really want to buy. They are listening to the wrong people and the minority of individuals that want content like this.
This is amazing. Shield of Dragon says, imagine what Craig could do with $400 million. You know what I'd do? Live on a beach.
Right?
I would own a beach. I would make it to where nobody can come for miles and miles away. Let's finish this up here.
This game was heavily championed behind the scenes. Now we know this because Sony ended up, what's funny is that the game is presented in Q1 2023 as this, we're kind of getting towards the end. The game is nowhere near being done. It's in a horrible position. And then Sony buys the team. The idea behind this was, And the term apparently verbatim had been used that Concord is the future of PlayStation.
Oh.
That they had such major ambition for this game that it was referred to internally as a Star Wars-like project for Sony.
Holy
that
shit.
It can be repeatedly revisited over and over and over again, not only in cross-media, but in what we were seeing. We've already kind of seen little bits of it. So the weekly story vignettes that they were going to release, and then, of course, the inclusion in Amazon's Secret Levels anthology, that's like just scratching the surface of it.
That's the most damning thing that I could potentially hear, because that to me said like they have no pulse of the gaming audience. If they thought this was going to be the next Star Wars.
Yeah. Yikes. Oh God, they're just so disconnected from reality. It's fucking insane.
Oh my gosh. All right, let's finish this, because this gets like I thought like 2 minutes in we're like, this is bad.
Yeah.
And then, like, a
It's
minute later,
just
like,
getting worse.
It's man, holy shit.
Ironically, the game was codenamed Chaos behind the scenes. And a major thing about the game is that there was, and I think we can kind of get this vibe from just the nature of the people making it and kind of the way the game reads and all that, a toxic positivity vibe. You weren't allowed to say anything, apparently internally, about this game.
What did I just say? What did I like fucking an hour ago? We were talking about nobody could say no. Nobody could say no. Oh my God. Vera, do you have anything on this, or do you want to keep consuming this right now?
It's bad. This is it's just progressively getting worse.
Oh my God. Yes. You can't say no to the point of $500 million being spent on a shithole game. Holy crap. Toxic positivity.
Yep.
About how like something's wrong with it, character designs are not right, and so on and so forth. They really truly believe this was Herman Hulst's baby, apparently. And he internally was himself a massive champion of the game. So it's not that. So the reason I'm telling you all of this, it's some interesting information, of course, but it's that I had said when people were like, Concord lost $200 million. Now people were pulling that money out because that's basically how much like some of the first party games like Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us Part 2, etc., kind of cost in that frame. And I was like, there's no way that it cost that much. I was saying like it cost 9 figures, probably like low $100 million, but there's no way it cost $200 million. No, it cost $400 million. So, and I am totally solid on this source, by the way. So that's why I'm willing to share it with you. Because again, I'm not really a journalist. So yeah, the big things to take away: $400 million loss. The game was in horrible shape as of 18 months ago before release. Not even monetization, no onboarding, most content not even there. The game was in such bad shape at that point that they spent the budget of it again in urgent outsourcing to get the game finished from all of these different angles over an 18-month period. Internally, the game was considered part of the future of PlayStation with heavy cross-media references and a system of toxic positivity surrounding it that didn't allow anyone to meaningfully change the course of the game. Because if the people at the top truly believe in something, you're not going to be able to do much about that, I don't think, from the trenches. So I thought people would be interested in that, and just wanted to throw that out there that, yeah, Sony really saw this as a Star Wars-like project for them, like the potential to, and now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Not only why they spent so much money on it, but why they bought the team. So there are people there, and to me, it's unclear who exactly the people are. I know some of the names. I don't want to get too deep into that because a lot of the things I learned were off the record, but obviously this is on background. And it's like, yeah, now it makes a little more sense. You spent, and by the way, the $400 million not included in how much it cost to buy the team.
There it is right there. There it is. Just confirming it right there.
My gosh.
Wow. This is, I mean, listen, people talk about ET. Let's just finish this up real quick, and I'll have some closing thoughts on this.
So yeah, so Concord is Sony's biggest released game by budget to date. And it is the biggest loss that they've ever had as a company on a project before.
Okay. This,
Yeah.
for me, this says everything, right? This is without a doubt, unequivocally, the biggest, not just video game disaster, but this may be the biggest entertainment product that's ever, like, disaster period. Outside of Sony, like, I can't think of anything bigger off the top of my head.
Rings of Power.
The $1 billion, yeah.
The $1 billion. That
I
was
gotta-
for the rights. That was for season 1, and some of the stuff that went over to season 2, like sets that were being reused, set pieces and costumes. I mean, this is a Rings of Power sized disaster that it rivals it.
But Rings of Power got a second season.
It did get a second season.
This barely got a second week.
Well, true.
This is, I mean, if this is accurate, and Colin's a pretty stand-up dude when it comes to his knowledge. He doesn't like just to throw shit out. I mean, he's a way better reporter than Paul. If this is true, this is the most fascinating story in my literally 20 years of doing video games.
What do we have to do to get a documentary on this? We got to get sources.
Yes.
My gosh.
As pointed out, it says, Craig, would you crowdfund
Yeah.
for a Concord documentary? Man, that would be spectacular. Holy shit. Unbelievable.
I mean, this is the biggest failure in video games by far, because you have to consider that it was rumored 200 million on the studio itself, so that's $600 million. It's insanity.
And the poor guy, look, that's saying the poor guy stepped away. He stepped away from his job, stepped down, right? Like stepped down from his position as director or whatever it was at the game studio. We talked about that earlier. Like,
Yeah.
dude, like just leave. Just leave everything. Like, you made your money, you're good. Get the hell out of here and go buy some land and go do nothing for the next 30 years. You know, go raise a family. Hopefully you do that better than you make video games.
It sounds, at least to me, that a lot of this blame, judging by what they said, falls on Herman Hulst, who's the head of PlayStation Studios, because he apparently considered it to be his baby, and like he really was the one who had a lot of faith in Firewalk. He's the one who, of course, initiated the acquisition. So it seems like this is going to fall on him. I mean, he's the major reason why we're talking about a $600 million disaster.
Does he step down?
I don't know. I don't know exactly how long he's been at Sony. That would be my question.
Man.
It's been a couple years at least. I think, okay, so it's been roughly about 17 months since he took the reins of PlayStation Studios, but he was, a big part of PlayStation Studios before that. So he was probably the one who initiated the sale, because that was, 18 months ago. And then it kind of was passed off to him. And then this was, I'm assuming, supposed to be like his studio defining game, that this is what was going to be the future. And well, it looks like it may be what kills him in the end.
Okay, well, look, and this is what's interesting about this. In June 2024, Holst and fellow executive were promoted to joint CEOs, right? So he's fallen upwards.
He has fallen upwards. It is true, but it's a co-CEO. So maybe one gets the boot. Yep, one gets the boot, and then he's out.
Wow. That is absolutely unbelievable. Unreal.